There is a place the sea remembers, even when men forget. It lies beyond the compass of mortal journeys, beyond the furthest islands where gulls no longer cry. There, wrapped in veils of mist and salt, Ogygia drifts, a secret held between waves, suspended between dawn and dusk. Time does not breathe the same way there. It stretches, folds, sighs, and then dissolves like foam. On this island, everything moves to a slower rhythm, not silence, but an eternal hum, the heartbeat of the sea itself. The air is thick with the scent of blooming vines and hidden sweetness. The leaves glisten with dew that never dries. Even the light feels alive, liquid and gold, draping the rocks and water with languid affection. Here, the world is endlessly beginning and never ending. It is said that when the gods grew weary of the noise of men, they cast certain souls away to solitude, not as punishment, but as preservation. Ogygia became the cradle of such a soul, Calypso, daughter of the Titan Atlas. Born of endurance and sky, she was bound not to roam among gods, nor to fade among mortals. Her domain was this island, untouched and unreachable, where immortality ripened into loneliness. Calypso's name means the one who conceals, but what she hides is not malice nor danger. It is longing itself, secret and endless. She walks along the shoreline, her bare feet sinking into sand that remembers every tide. Around her ankles the sea murmurs in a language only she can understand, soft syllables of desire and return. Each wave rises like a lover's breath and collapses at her touch. She listens, always listens, for what the ocean might bring her back. The island responds to her moods. When she smiles, flowers burst open as though competing for her attention. When she sighs, the palms bend low, and even the sun softens its glare. She is both queen and prisoner of this lush domain, adorned in eternity, yet starved for change. No mortal eyes have seen her, not truly, but the sea knows her shape. It draws around her like silk, curling at her hips, whispering through her hair. The wind, too, is intimate with her scent, wild honey and crushed leaves. She moves with a grace that belongs to no season, a stillness that seems to hold the world together. And yet, behind the quiet perfection of Ogygia, there is a rhythm of waiting. It hums beneath the surface, subtle and endless. The sea keeps bringing her echoes, the crash of oars, the cry of lost sailors, fragments of songs torn apart by storms. Sometimes she dreams she hears a human voice calling from the distance, a voice raw with salt and longing, rising through the wind like prayer.
But no one comes. Centuries unfold like petals, each one identical to the last. The stars repeat their patterns, and the moon keeps tracing her slow dance across the surface of the waves. Calypso counts them not in days, but in sighs. The gods above have forgotten her, or perhaps they remember too well and choose to let her be. The mortals below never speak her name, and so she becomes something more and less than memory, a presence, a perfume in the wind. When she dreams, she sees her father's shoulders holding up the sky, the endless strain of it, the eternal burden. She wonders if that is what she has inherited, the art of bearing eternity with grace. Yet, unlike Atlas, her punishment has no weight, no resistance. It is made of softness, repetition, and the cruel gentleness of paradise. Ujigia is a beautiful cage. Its streams sing to her. Its meadows brush against her skin like whispers. Every fruit she touches bursts with flavor, yet each sweetness fades too quickly. The pleasure renews and repeats until it loses meaning. Perfection, she has learned, is another form of decay. There are times when she lies upon the rocks, eyes half closed, letting the sun spill over her like liquid fire. Her hair spreads around her, merging with the moss and the tide. She imagines the world beyond the horizon, cities of bronze and marble, ships with sails swollen by wind, laughter echoing from shore to shore. She imagines the warmth of another body beside hers, mortal warmth, fleeting and real. The waves mock her gently. They bring her shells, pieces of driftwood, feathers, gifts from the moving world, each one a reminder of everything she cannot touch. There is an ache in her that even the sea cannot soothe. It is not hunger. It is not sorrow. It is the ache of endless beauty without witness, the tragedy of a song that no one hears. When she sings, the air thickens with sweetness. Her voice is low, slow, woven with melancholy. It rises through the palm fronds and out across the water, where dolphins pause and the wind itself seems to hold its breath. It is said that her song can calm storms and break hearts. But she sings not to enchant. She sings to remember that she still exists. And sometimes her song returns to her in echoes. Sometimes the sea answers. In the depths, something stirs. A storm far away gathers strength. Somewhere beyond her sight, men struggle against the waves, and one of them, weary, clever, broken, will soon be carried toward her shore. But that time has not yet arrived. For now Ujigia floats in its perfect isolation, its quiet eternity. Calypso stands by the water's edge, the horizon wrapped in mist. The ocean glows faintly, silver blue, as if illuminated from within. She closes her eyes and breathes. The world feels paused, like an inhale that never ends. In her solitude, she has learned the language of every sound. The hush of foam, the pulse of the tide, the delicate throb of the earth beneath her feet. She has learned to speak to silence itself. She has learned to love it, even as it consumes her. Sometimes she thinks the sea is her reflection, vast, alive, incapable of rest. Other times she thinks it is her lover, faithful yet indifferent, always arriving, always leaving. She cannot decide which truth hurts more. The island watches her. The vines curl closer, the waves rise higher, as if drawn by her longing. It is not only she who waits, the whole of Ogygia waits with her. The flowers open each morning, not for the sun, but for her gaze. The birds circle not for food, but to trace her shadow. Every part of this place exists because she does. And yet, what meaning has existence when nothing ever changes? The gods call it peace. She calls it silence. She remembers faintly what it felt like to walk among others, laughter like sudden flame, voices that carried imperfection and warmth. She remembers faces that aged and vanished, their mortality like a beautiful fragrance that faded too soon. Immortality, she realizes, is not abundance, but absence, an endless continuation that erases meaning. Sometimes she wishes the sea would take her too, that she could dissolve into its depths, scattered like foam, carried through the veins of the world. But the island will not release her, and the gods will not let her die. So she endures, luminous, fragrant, eternal, the embodiment of waiting. And perhaps that is why the sea loves her still, because even the waves, restless and free, envy what cannot move. If you listen closely, not with your ears, but with the quiet inside you, you might hear her. Somewhere in the hush between tides, her song still drifts. It is not loud, it does not demand attention, it simply is, a sound woven from longing and sea light, from dreams that never end. And in that song lies a whisper of a goddess forgotten, of an island untouched by time, of love that has not yet arrived, but already aches to begin. Ogygia sleeps beneath the sun's golden veil, patient and tender. The waves keep their rhythm. The air trembles with expectation. Somewhere beyond the horizon, fate begins to move, slow as the turning of tides, inevitable as desire itself. But for now, there is only the island, the endless sea, and a goddess who waits.
The sea delivered him, as it delivers all things it cannot keep, gently, as if reluctant to let go. At dawn, when the horizon was a pale shimmer, Calypso found him upon the sand. His body lay half buried in foam, bruised and exhausted, his skin marked by salt and sun. The waves withdrew from him quietly, ashamed of their violence. He was beautiful in ruin, a fragment of the mortal world, carved by suffering, softened by survival. For a long while she did not move. She watched the pulse at his throat, the slow rise of his chest. To her eyes, accustomed to the perfect stillness of immortality, his fragility was unbearable and magnificent. She knelt beside him, her shadow merging with his. The scent of brine and blood clung to him. She brushed sand from his face, fingers trembling. A mortal, she thought, a fleeting thing, and yet how vividly he burned. Calypso had known beauty in all its forms, divine, unchanging, immaculate. But his beauty was urgent. It trembled with life because it could fade. The island seemed to pause. Even the waves held their breath. For the first time in centuries, Ogygia had brought her something unpredictable, a story that moved. When he stirred, his eyes met hers through a blur of light. They were the color of storm water, deep and uncertain. "Where am I?" he whispered. Her voice came soft as tide. "Ogygia, you are safe." He tried to rise, but his strength failed. She touched his shoulder gently. "Rest," she murmured. "The sea has not finished leaving you." And so he stayed. Days passed in a rhythm that blurred like the tide. Calypso tended to him, her hands sure, tender, knowing. She brought him fruit glowing with sweetness, cool water from her springs. Her movements were careful, her silence eloquent. The island breathed with her, its light bending to her will. She spoke little, but her presence filled the air. Odysseus watched her, fascinated. She was divine, yet there was a sorrow in her calm, a loneliness he could feel but not name. He told her fragments of his journey, the war, the loss, the endless wandering. His words were rough, unsteady, like oars through broken water. Calypso listened, her gaze still as moonlight. Each story he told drew her deeper into his impermanence. He was movement made flesh, she the stillness that craved to follow.
Sometimes, when he slept, she watched him. His breathing, the twitch of his lips, the small tremors of dreaming, all seemed unbearably human. How strange that mortality could hold such grace. Eternity, by comparison, felt empty. When he woke, she asked his name. "Odysseus," he said. The sound of it shivered through her. She repeated it slowly. "Odysseus, a name that has crossed many seas." He smiled faintly. "And each one has tried to keep me." Her laughter rippled through the air. "Then you and I are not so different. The sea keeps us both." From that moment, something invisible began to weave between them. Not love yet, but curiosity, soft and dangerous. She showed him Ogygia, the pools where lilies opened at her touch, the groves where air shimmered gold. He followed her with reverent eyes, aware that every step brought him deeper into enchantment. And she in turn watched him with hunger disguised as grace. At night they sat beside the fire. He spoke of ships and stars, of winds that sang like gods. She spoke of the stillness of roots, the patience of tides. They met halfway, her calm softening his restlessness, his motion awakening her silence. He began to heal, yet his eyes often turned toward the horizon. Calypso felt it each time, the invisible pull, the memory of home. She understood that look.
It was the same yearning she carried for what she could never have: change. Still, when he turned back to her, that longing changed shape. He looked at her not as a goddess, but as something known. She saw wonder in his gaze, not worship, but recognition. Sometimes his hand brushed hers. Sometimes his voice softened when he spoke her name. Desire lived in such moments, fragile, waiting, certain. Calypso told herself she did not crave him, only his warmth. Yet desire, once born, grows of its own will. It ripened inside her, slow and luminous. She dreamed differently now, no longer the endless calm of her island, but movement, sails in the wind, waves rising, the sound of mortal hearts. She dreamed of him, and in dreaming became more human than divine. He too changed. His laughter returned, though tinged with quiet. He looked at her with something between affection and awe. And yet beneath his calm she sensed it, the world calling him back.
Sometimes he walked alone by the shore. Calypso watched from the cliffs, her hair streaming like flame in the wind. The sea curled around his ankles, trying to claim him. He would pause, stare into the distance, and she would ache, not from jealousy, but from beauty. To love something that must leave is to understand eternity. He was what she was not: movement, change, mortality. And in him she saw the truth of her own desire, that even the divine yearns to end. When he returned from those walks, she met him with a smile. "The sea tempts you again," she said. He answered quietly, "The sea tempts everyone." She touched his arm. "Then let it wait a little longer." Time in Ogygia began to move again. The air felt different, alive. Even the silence seemed to hum. The island bloomed brighter, as though aware of their closeness. At dusk, they lingered by the water, their reflections trembling together. The distance between them grew thinner, measured only in breaths. He reached toward her once, then hesitated. She saw the question in his eyes, and the knowledge that every answer would cost them both. Calypso looked at him then, not as a goddess, but as a woman. The curve of his throat, the scars on his hands, the shadows of pain behind his eyes, all of it drew her nearer. He was mortal, finite, imperfect. He was real. And she, who had never changed, felt herself unraveling. She wanted to tell him that eternity meant nothing without moments like this, that beauty only exists because it ends. But she said nothing. She only stood close enough for her breath to mingle with his, and let silence speak for her. The waves rose softly at their feet. The light deepened. The world grew smaller, folded around them. He turned toward her as if drawn by something older than choice. Calypso closed her eyes. She did not touch him yet. She wanted to remember this, the space between longing and surrender, the pause before desire becomes destiny. In that pause, the island held its breath. For the first time since the gods had bound her here, she felt alive. Not eternal, not divine, simply alive. She thought of her father, Atlas, holding up the sky. She thought of how even he must long sometimes to let it fall. And she understood then the sea had brought her not rescue, but reflection. Odysseus was the embodiment of everything she was denied. Movement, change, the possibility of ending. Through him, she would learn what it meant to ache, to lose, to remember. He was her horizon, she was his pause. The stillness and the storm, eternity and the moment. And though neither spoke the word love, the air around them began to taste of it. Salt, sun, and something inevitable.
The days on Ogygia began to stretch like silk, soft, shimmering, and deceptively endless. The sea whispered in rhythms that lulled even the gods to sleep. Yet beneath its lullaby, something restless stirred. Calypso knew the pattern well, desire blooming like a secret flower, fragrant and doomed. She had seen it before in mortals who washed upon her shore. Each carried the same ache, the same unreachable horizon behind their eyes. But none had stayed long enough to make her forget that she was immortal. None until him. Odysseus had learned to laugh again. His wounds had healed, his strength returned, yet his gaze often wandered toward the edge of the island. He would stand at the shore, the hem of his tunic damp with foam, watching where the sea met the sky, as though searching for a promise only he could hear. Calypso watched him from the cliffs, her heart divided between awe and dread. She wanted to call his name, to draw him back to her, to remind him of the perfection around them, the fruit that never spoiled, the sun that never burned, the nights that wrapped them in velvet silence. She wanted to tell him that paradise was not a prison, but she knew the truth too well. Even paradise can suffocate if one cannot leave. That night, when the stars sank low over the sea, she went to him. He sat by the water, tracing circles in the sand. She said, "You are quiet." He smiled faintly. Quiet feels strange after so much noise. I still dream of it, the shouting of men, the breaking of waves, the wind that never rested. Calypso lowered herself beside him. "Yes," she murmured, "and still I hear Ithaca calling." The name stung her, though she did not show it. Ithaca, the word itself a wound. She reached out, brushing her fingers against his hand. "What has it given you, that place of dust and war? Here you are healed, here you are cherished." He looked at her then, and the softness in his eyes almost undid her. "You have given me more kindness than the gods ever have, but I was not made for stillness." She turned away before he could see the pain in her face. "Stillness is not death, it is eternity." He laughed gently. "And what is eternity but the longest form of longing?" The words pierced her.
She wanted to silence them with her lips, to drown them in the warmth of her body, but she only stood, the moonlight tracing the curve of her shoulders. "Come," she said quietly, "walk with me." They followed a path through the grove, where the air shimmered with the scent of flowers that bloomed only at night. The island seemed to glow for them alone, as if trying to convince him to stay. She led him to her cavern, a place where vines curled down like green silk, and the walls breathed with light. The pool inside reflected their faces as if the water itself had fallen in love. "Do you see?" she asked softly. "Even the island remembers you." He reached out, his hand touching hers in the reflection before touching her skin. "You are the island." She trembled. The air thickened between them, sweet and dangerous.
He stepped closer. The scent of salt and jasmine clung to her. "You've bewitched everything here," he whispered. "Not you," she said. "Not yet." His smile faded, and something darker flickered in his eyes. Desire edged with sorrow. "If I let you, I may never leave." "Then don't," she breathed. Silence. The waves crashed distantly, as if protesting. He kissed her then, hesitant at first, then with the weight of everything he could not say. Calypso felt the world tilt beneath them. The vines stirred, the air rippled, the sea seemed to hum their names. For a moment, eternity bent. She drew him into the water, where their reflections shattered into light. Skin against skin, they forgot the gods, the wars, the years. His touch was mortal, imperfect, and achingly alive. Hers was divine, steady, and endless. Together they were the meeting of tide and shore, each breaking the other beautifully. When dawn came, the sea was calm again, as though nothing had happened, but everything had changed. For days after, they lived within the illusion of forever. They walked the island hand in hand, spoke softly, laughed often. Odysseus built a small boat from driftwood, not to sail, but to remember. Calypso watched him carve it, each cut of the blade like a heartbeat she did not wish to hear. One evening he spoke without looking up. He said, "You could come with me." She froze. "You know I cannot." He nodded. "Then neither can I go." The words should have soothed her, but instead they filled her with dread. Love that stayed out of guilt was worse than loneliness. That night she lay awake, watching the shadows shift. The sea whispered secrets she had long tried to forget. "You cannot keep him," it said. "He belongs to motion, not to memory." She rose and walked outside. The sky was heavy with stars. She felt the presence of the gods. Them. Always watching, always taking. Her anger surged. Why must she lose what she had only just found? She returned to him and touched his face as he slept. His breath was steady, the lines of his body softened by sleep. How cruel that mortals could seem immortal in their dreams. She whispered, "Stay with me." I can make you ageless. I can make this moment endless. He stirred, but did not wake. Her voice broke. You could forget the storms, the pain. You could be mine. He turned in his sleep, murmuring a name. Penelope. The sound was small, but it tore through her like a wave through glass. Calypso drew back, her heart hollowing. The illusion cracked. She saw it clearly now. The paradise she had built was also a cage. Her love was not freedom. It was longing wearing the mask of peace. The next day, the wind changed. It came fierce from the east, bringing with it the scent of Olympus. She knew what it meant before the voice came. Hermes descending, golden and untouchable. He landed upon the sand, radiant and cold. Zeus commands, he said simply. Odysseus must go. Calypso stood silent. Must? His destiny waits beyond your shore. And mine? She asked. Hermes smiled faintly. You chose your eternity long ago. When he vanished, the island fell quiet. Even the birds seemed to grieve. She found Odysseus where the surf met the rocks. He saw her face and knew. They will not let me stay, he said. She wanted to hate him for the relief in his voice. Instead, she touched his cheek, tracing the salt there. Would you have stayed if they had? He hesitated, and that pause was answer enough. That night, they did not speak of leaving again. They spoke only of small things, of the stars, of the smell of rain, of the feel of his hand in hers. The world around them dimmed to those details, precious and unbearable. When he kissed her, it was not in desire, but in farewell. Calypso held him tightly, memorizing the weight of him, the warmth, the rhythm. She wanted to press time into stillness, to carve his name into eternity. But morning would come, and with it the sea's demand. At dawn, she helped him prepare the raft. Her hands, once capable of weaving storms and silences, now trembled like those of any woman. She loaded the provisions, tied the ropes, and when it was done, she stood beside him in the shallow water. You will forget me, she said. Never, he promised. They both knew he lied, though not cruelly. Mortals must forget to keep living. She leaned forward, her lips barely touching his ear. Then go before I change my mind. He looked at her once more, his eyes full of gratitude and grief. Then he pushed away from the shore. Calypso watched until the raft became a shadow, then a dot, then nothing. The sea closed around the emptiness he left behind. She stood there long after he vanished, the tide curling around her ankles. The illusion of paradise had dissolved. It was truth. Love, when caged, becomes sorrow. And yet, even sorrow was a kind of beauty. The sea was still when the end began. The horizon shone pale, and the air was thick with the taste of farewell. Calypso walked through her island as though through a dream, collapsing in slow motion. Every leaf, every whisper of wind seemed to ache with the knowledge of what was coming. The world had turned fragile, and she could feel time, that cruel and sacred thing, stirring again. Odysseus stood by the half-built raft, his hands raw from labor, his face hollowed by sleepless nights. He looked older than he had when he arrived, though the island had preserved his strength. He was not yet gone, but already becoming memory. Calypso watched him for a long time. The sea behind him was silver and merciless. She thought of how easy it would be to summon a storm, to break his vessel, to hide him once more within her eternity. A single word, a thought. That was all it would take. The gods might rage, but she had defied them before. Yet she did not move. She walked toward him, slowly, each step sinking into the sand like surrender. "It is finished," he said quietly, not looking at her. "Yes," she whispered, "finished." They stood together in the silence that follows understanding, the kind of silence that cannot be broken by sound, only by touch. Calypso reached out, her fingers tracing the curve of his wrist, feeling the pulse beneath, steady, mortal, and unbearably precious. "Do you fear it?" she asked. "The sea? The leaving?" He looked up, his gaze steady. "I fear forgetting." Her throat tightened. "Then don't." "I will try," he said. They both knew trying was not enough. Memory is cruel to mortals. It fades like tide marks on sand. She stepped closer. The air between them shimmered. "Stay a little longer," she said softly. "Just tonight." He hesitated. The wind stirred his hair, the scent of salt and pine wrapped around them like a spell. He nodded. Calypso led him back through the grove to her cave, where the light of dusk poured like gold through the vines. The pool inside glowed faintly, reflecting the shifting fire of sunset. The air was warm, heavy with the breath of the island. They did not speak again. She removed her veil, letting it fall to the floor like water. The last rays of the sun painted her skin in shades of rose and bronze. Odysseus looked at her not as a man looks upon a goddess, but as one looks upon a truth too vast to bear. When he reached for her, it was with reverence and fear. His hands trembled, but not from hesitation.
Calypso drew him close, guiding his fingers as though teaching him the language of immortals. The world outside faded. The sound of waves became the rhythm of their breath. They moved slowly, as though time itself had paused to watch. Every touch was a conversation, his flesh speaking of journeys and loss, hers answering with stillness and devotion. His scars, his warmth, the salt upon his lips, all of it mortal, temporary, perfect. She felt his heartbeat against her chest and realized she had never truly known the sound of life until now. Immortality had always been quiet, now it throbbed with urgency. When he whispered her name, it broke her open. Calypso, a prayer, a plea, a farewell. She pressed her face to his neck, her hair falling around them like a veil of shadow and light. "Don't speak," she breathed. "Let the world end here." And for a while it did. In that moment, there was no god or mortal, no leaving or staying. There was only touch, breath, heartbeat, and the pulse of something older than both, the current that had carried them to this inevitable shore. He held her as if the world could be contained within his arms. She clung to him as if eternity could be rewritten by love. Time folded around them, gentle and cruel. When it was over, they lay in the afterglow, bodies tangled, silence heavy with knowing. The air smelled of salt and jasmine and endings. Odysseus touched her hair, smoothing it from her face. He whispered, "If the gods had been kind, I would have met you at the beginning." She smiled faintly. "The beginning and the end are the same for us. You just forget the middle." He laughed softly, a sound that trembled. "You speak as though you've lived this before." She said, "I have, every time I love." He turned to her then, eyes searching. "Will you curse me when I'm gone?" She said, "I will bless you. Every wave that touches you will carry my name." He closed his eyes. "Then I will listen for it." They stayed like that until the first light of dawn began to bleed into the cave. The sky outside burned pink and gold. Calypso rose, moving quietly. She gathered her garments, her hair shimmering with dew. He watched her, his heart heavy. "Will I remember this?" he asked. She met his gaze. "You will remember the feeling, not the form. That is how mortals survive." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "No," she said gently. "If you hold me now, you'll never leave. And if I don't, then you'll still never leave, just in another way." The truth hung between them, unbearable and pure.
She walked to the pool and dipped her hand into the water. It rippled, glowing faintly. "Look," she said. He approached, and the surface shifted to show his journey. The raft waiting, the sea vast and cruel, Ithaca distant and waiting. "This is what waits for you," she said. "And for you?" he asked. "The waiting itself," she replied. He turned to her, eyes shining. "You deserve more than that." Her smile was soft. "Perhaps, but even the gods must learn to ache." The moment stretched, fragile, sacred. She stepped toward him once more, placed her hand upon his heart. "Take this," she whispered. "Not my immortality, but my memory. When you see the sea, when the wind touches you, it will be me. That will be enough." He kissed her hand. "You are more mercy than any god I've known."
I am only love, and love is both mercy and punishment. Outside, the waves rose higher, impatient. The gods were calling. Calypso felt the pull of Olympus, the invisible leash of divine decree. She looked at Odysseus one last time. "Go, before they see my tears," she said. But he didn't move. "Say it," he murmured. "Say you love me." Her breath caught. "I have been saying it since the first wave brought me to you." And then, because words were too small for what lived between them, she kissed him, not with desperation, but with devotion. It was a kiss that sealed nothing, promised nothing, only honored what had already been lost. When they parted, she tasted salt, his tears, her own, or the sea's. She could not tell. He stepped back, the distance between them widening. The light of morning turned everything pale. He turned once more to the path that would lead him to the shore. Calypso watched him go, her heart burning quietly, like a candle left to consume itself. When he reached the edge of the forest, he looked back. She stood framed by the gold of dawn, her hair a dark flame, her eyes endless. For a moment, time stopped, and then he was gone. Calypso remained, the sound of the sea rushing back in, the echo of his presence clinging to the air. The cave felt larger now, emptier. She pressed her hand to her chest and whispered, "Love was never meant to last, only to be remembered." The wind carried her words away. The island, once radiant, dimmed to silence. And yet, somewhere across the sea, a mortal heart beat with the faint rhythm of her own. Proof that even in parting, they had become one. Morning came with a gentleness that felt like cruelty. The sea glimmered calm, as if mocking what it had stolen. The air was heavy, suspended in that fragile quiet that follows the breaking of something sacred. Calypso stood upon the shore, her bare feet sinking into the sand, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sky met the water, a line so thin it might have been a wound. Odysseus's raft waited beside her, woven from cedar and cypress, bound with ropes made of her own hair. She had built it with care and sorrow, her hands trembling as she tied each knot. It was her final act of love, to make his leaving possible. He approached her slowly, his body strong again, his face marked by the kind of beauty that only grief can shape. He carried the smell of the island on his skin, the faint trace of her still clinging there. When he stopped before her, neither spoke. The silence between them was vast enough to drown in. Finally, she said, "The winds are kind today." He looked out at the water. "Because they are yours." She smiled faintly. "No, the gods have already taken that from me." He turned to her then,
his eyes soft with pain. "You could stop me," he said. "You could make the sea rise and take me back." "I could," she answered. "But I would not know what I loved if I did." He frowned, uncertain. Calypso stepped closer. "You were meant to move, and I was meant to stay." The wind lifted her hair, carrying the scent of salt and cedar. She raised her hand and touched his cheek, not as lover, not as goddess, but as memory reaching across time. "You will forget me," she said softly. His voice trembled. "No." "Yes," she said. "But it will not matter. The forgetting is how mortals honor love. You will forget the words, but not the warmth. You will not remember my face, but you will remember how silence felt full." He took her hand and kissed it. "If that is true," he murmured, "then you will live in every quiet I find." Calypso's smile broke. "Then promise me one thing." "Anything."
When you reach home, do not speak of me as sorrow. Speak of me as the sea, something vast, something that held you only because it could not help it. He nodded, unable to speak. For a long time they stood together in the shallows, the waves curling around their ankles like a benediction. The world seemed suspended, two souls poised between eternity and departure. Then the sky darkened briefly, a shadow passing across the sun. The gods were watching. The decree of Zeus was not patient. "It is time," she said. Odysseus looked to the raft, then back to her. "If I could choose, I would stay." "And if you stayed," she replied, "you would cease to be who you are." He smiled sadly. "Perhaps I already have." She shook her head. "No, you are Odysseus, the one who must always leave." He stepped onto the raft. The wood creaked softly beneath his weight. Calypso waded into the water until it reached her knees, her hands still resting on the edge of his vessel. She had built it to carry him, but now every rope felt like a vein she would have to cut. He looked down at her. "Will you pray for me?" Her gaze met his, steady and luminous. "I do not pray, but I will listen. When the waves reach my shore, I will know which are yours." He closed his eyes, swallowing the grief that burned behind them. "You are kinder than the gods." "I am what they forgot to be," she answered. For a moment, neither moved. The sea lapped quietly, the sound of inevitability. Then, with a slow exhale, she released the raft. The ropes slipped from her hands, wet and trembling, and the current took him. He drifted from her, the tide carrying him farther into the brightness. The sail caught the wind, her wind, and the distance widened.
Calypso watched in silence, her heart ancient and weary, clenched like a fist inside her chest. She had thought herself beyond pain long ago, but pain was the only proof that love had existed at all. She watched until the raft was a dark blur upon the horizon, then a speck, then nothing. Only the sea remained, calm, indifferent, eternal. The stillness afterward was unbearable. The island, once so alive with his presence, seemed hollowed. The groves whispered his name. The pools reflected his absence. The birds did not sing. Even the air felt faded, as though the color of the world had gone with him. Calypso wandered through the places they had touched, the rock where he had sat, the fire where they had spoken of dreams, the pool where their reflections had once mingled. Every part of Ogygia remembered, and because she was its heart, she remembered too. She returned to her cave as night began to fall. The air inside was cool, tinged with the scent of damp earth and forgotten sweetness. She sat by the water, where the faint echo of his voice still lingered in the ripples.
There she wept, quietly, without drama, the way the sea weeps against the shore. Her tears fell into the pool, merging with the water, becoming part of the island's eternal breath. Each drop shimmered, glowing faintly, as though the world itself sought to comfort her. But even that light could not reach the hollow in her chest. Hours passed. The moon rose, silver and watchful. Calypso lifted her head and spoke softly into the empty air. "You win again," she said, "not to the gods, but to time itself." And yet she did not curse them. She had learned something no god had the courage to feel, that loss, when accepted, becomes sacred. She stood and walked to the mouth of the cave. The night sea stretched endlessly before her, vast and quiet. Somewhere beyond that horizon, a man she had loved sailed toward his destiny, carrying a memory that might one day dissolve into myth. But she would remain, the keeper of what was, the guardian of what could never be again. The stars above shimmered, their light trembling on the waves. She whispered into the wind, "Go, my love. Let the world remember you. I will remember for both of us." The wind answered, soft and low, curling through her hair like a caress. For the first time in centuries, Calypso knelt before the sea, not as its mistress, but as its child. The tide came forward, touched her knees, and drew back as if in reverence. She smiled faintly. "Take him safely home," she said, "and bring me silence." The waves obeyed. When dawn returned, it found her standing in the same place, her expression calm, her heart exhausted. She felt lighter,
not from joy, but from release. The burden of wanting had passed. Only love remained, stripped of hope, pure as the tide. Above her the gulls circled and called. Below, the sea glittered like glass. And in that fragile balance between mourning and peace, Calypso finally understood her curse. Not eternal solitude, but eternal memory. The gods had forced her to let him go, but in doing so, they had bound her to something far greater than possession. They had bound her to love itself, its ache, its grace, its inevitable loss. As the morning wind brushed her face, she closed her eyes. The silence of the island returned, deep and full, like the sea after a wave has withdrawn. And in that silence, her heart continued to beat, slow, steady, eternal.
The sea has no memory, and yet it remembers her. Each wave that folds upon the shore whispers fragments of her name, not as worship, but as a rhythm. Calypso. The syllables dissolve in the foam, reform in the hush of the tide, rise again in the breath of the wind. Time itself bends around her story, softening the edges until only essence remains. A goddess who loved, and in loving became human. Ogygia still floats, untouched and eternal, somewhere beyond mortal maps. Its forests are as lush as ever, its air as heavy with perfume and salt. Yet something within it has changed, a subtle emptiness that hums beneath the perfection. The flowers bloom too perfectly now, the water glimmers too still. Paradise holds its breath, as if aware that it once contained something it can never again recreate. Calypso walks among her gardens, her feet brushing the moss that remembers his step. She does not weep anymore. The tears have long dried, and what remains is quieter, a sorrow that no longer seeks release. She has learned the art of stillness, not as curse, but as a form of worship. Every movement she makes, every breath she takes, feels like an offering to what once was. There are nights when she stands by the sea, her hair loose and dark against the pale moon. The stars shimmer above her, distant and patient. She wonders if he looks upon the same sky in some other place, perhaps older now, perhaps gone. The thought does not wound her anymore. It soothes her like a hand upon a scar. For what is immortality, she thinks, if not the slow remembering of what mortals forget? She knows now that the gods had not punished her, not truly. They had given her what no divine being should ever touch, the fullness of loss. Through it, she discovered depth. Through it, she learned that eternity without change is not peace, but stagnation. There had been a time
when she believed love was possession, that to hold someone was to know them. But Odysseus had taught her otherwise. He had been a flame, brief, blinding, and destined to leave ash, and yet from that ash she had found warmth that endured. Sometimes in the still hours before dawn, she closes her eyes and feels him beside her again. The scent of cedar, the weight of his hand against her skin, the low murmur of his voice when he thought she slept. These memories are no longer chains, they are tides. They come, they go, and in their rhythm she breathes. The island, too, has softened. The birds have returned, their songs lighter. The pools shimmer with quiet life. Even the sea seems gentler, its rage subdued, as though Calypso's sorrow had once stirred it, and now her acceptance calms it. Ogygia has become what she has become, still divine, but touched by mortality's grace.
There are stories told by sailors who lose their way in storms. They say that when the sea grows too calm after rage, they sometimes glimpse a figure standing on a far-off shore. A woman in white, her hair the color of midnight, her eyes as endless as the horizon. They say she does not speak, but her silence feels like forgiveness. They call her the keeper of the lost. But she calls herself nothing. She has long ceased to need names. For Calypso has become something beyond the boundaries of her myth. She is not the abandoned goddess, nor the jealous captor, nor the lover undone. She is what remains after the story ends, the quiet between the waves, the pause between one life and the next. And in that quiet, she has found a strange kind of happiness. Sometimes she sings, though not the way she once did. Her songs are softer now, lower, as though meant only for the sea. They are not spells to bind, but blessings to release. Her voice drifts across the water, carrying no plea, no sorrow, only gratitude. For love, even when it ends, is a miracle. To have felt it even once is to have known the pulse of creation itself. She thinks of Odysseus often, but not as the man who left. She thinks of him as the one who taught her the meaning of motion, that to love something is to set it free, not from indifference, but from reverence. There is beauty in endings. That was what mortals had always known, and what gods had always feared. For a god's curse is not solitude, it is permanence. To live without decay is to live without urgency, without desire. But to love something fleeting, to hold it knowing it will go, that is what gives meaning to existence. Calypso smiles when she thinks this. The corners of her lips lift like sunrise. Her immortality has not changed, but its weight has. What once felt like a cage now feels like a horizon. Time stretches before her, not as punishment, but as possibility. Endless tides of remembrance, endless chances to feel the faint echo of what was human. She has learned to listen to the sea differently now. Before, it was a mirror of her longing. Now it is a companion, ancient, unpredictable, alive. It speaks in patterns she no longer tries to master. She lets it move through her, lets its rhythm erase the remnants of her pride. In the deep quiet of Ogygia, she sometimes kneels by the water and whispers to the waves, "Tell him I remember." And somewhere far beyond the reach of her voice, the sea carries that whisper to another shore, where perhaps some mortal dreamer hears it in his sleep and dreams of a woman who once loved the world enough to let it go. Calypso does not wait anymore. Waiting implies hope, and she has transcended that. What remains is something deeper, a still devotion, a love that no longer seeks fulfillment, only presence. She tends her island as one tends a memory, gently, with reverence. Each flower she touches blooms a little brighter. Each stone she steps upon hums faintly with her pulse. Her loneliness has become her art. And perhaps that is the truest meaning of her story. For in the end, myths do not exist to comfort. They exist to reveal. Calypso's tale is not one of cruelty, but of awakening. The moment when a timeless being discovers the beauty of transience. Through the ache of letting go, she became something purer than a goddess. She became aware. The sea will rise and fall for eternity. Islands will appear and disappear. Names will fade, but her essence will linger in the still air before dawn, in the hush that follows a departing wave, in the soft ache that mortals feel when they remember someone who cannot return. That ache is her gift. She is not waiting for Odysseus anymore. She is waiting for nothing. Yet in that nothingness, she has found peace. Her heart beats, slow, eternal, but no longer empty. And if you listen closely, when the tide hushes and the moon paints the sea in silver, you may hear her voice, not calling, not weeping, but simply breathing, a whisper shaped by eternity itself. Love is beautiful because it ends. Then the sound fades, leaving behind only the sea, vast, quiet, alive. And the world continues to turn, unaware that somewhere beyond its edges, a goddess watches with gentle eyes, forever changed, forever remembering.